All right, good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here. Well, let's get started. My name is JC Cortez, and I'm the Director of Training and Development here at Synergia's Metropolitan Parent Center. Synergia has been here serving New Yorkers for the past 40 years and supporting families and children with disabilities of all disabilities. And we're happy to be here. We're here in East Harlem, and we offer a rich source of information and training tailored for parents, including parents whose primary language is not English or who they themselves have special training needs. We help them participate more effectively in their children's education and development, and we partner with professionals and policymakers to improve outcomes for all children with disabilities. Synergia, which is Spanish for synergy, is one of New York City's 3 federally funded parent centers committed to serving people with disabilities and their families with an added focus on communities of color and the economically disadvantaged. We create innovative programs ranging from transitional housing for homeless families who have children with disabilities, community residences for adults with developmental disabilities, and parenting and education advocacy training for parents of children with disabilities. But before we get started, let's do some housekeeping really quick. This webinar is being recorded. It will be available on Facebook and YouTube after our presentation. Also, you will be receiving a link to the recording in case you miss any of it. It'll be 2 hours long, and we will take a 5-minute break around an hour into it. So give everybody a chance to stretch and get another cup of coffee if we need to or whatever. And then you'll receive the presentation, a copy of the presentation as well. So you will receive all of that information. We're happy to provide it, and please feel free to share it. So yes, also, we're being broadcast on Facebook Live. So hello to all of our Facebookers out there. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions on Facebook, please be sure to place your questions in the comments section. We'll be monitoring those and be sure to pass them along. Same thing here. For those of us joining on Zoom, please put your questions either in the chat or in the Q&A. Either one is fine. We won't overlook it. And we hope to answer all of your questions as much as we can. If it's not answered to your satisfaction, please feel free to elaborate more, ask it again, or ask it in a different way. We want to make sure that everybody leaves here knowing as much as they can and leaving knowing more and feeling more comfortable around this important subject of starting the conversation. Let's see. We will offer this presentation in Spanish next week on Wednesday. So if you know anybody that speaks Spanish that can benefit from this, we're happy to do that presentation as well. So with that, I want to introduce my co-presenter, Ms. Beth Sola. Ms. Sola has 25 years of extensive experience working with individuals with developmental and intellectual disabilities as a bilingual special educator, working with individuals from infancy to adulthood and their families, and currently as a self-direction broker to create inclusive opportunities and self-determined individuals to live and support self-determination and individuals to live their best lives. As the parent of a young adult on the autism spectrum, she also understands the importance of partnering with other parents to start the conversation about healthy relationships and sexuality education from an early age. Elizabeth is on the advisory board and leads parent workshops in collaboration with Elevatus Training. Beth, thank you for being here. Welcome to Synergia. This is such an important topic on starting the conversation and having that conversation with your child about sexuality, and especially in intellectual and developmental disability population that seems to always get overlooked. And so we really want to thank you for being here, because we all, we can never ignore the development of any individual, regardless of their abilities or disabilities. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I just did put it in a link in the chat, just for a little survey, quick survey, just regarding demographics. So to be filled out, that would be great. Appreciate it. And yes, I'm just, welcome everyone here to this conversation. And I'm just really happy to see such a tremendous response to this. Once again, I've got 25 years background working as a special educator, as JC had said, working within self-direction and becoming a sexuality educator and trainer with Elevators Training because of my looking for more information for my son, really, who's 27 years old, and he's on the autism spectrum. And, just as every parent, my greatest hope for all my children is for them to be happy, to be able to speak up for themselves in the way they communicate, have meaningful relationships with people who care, and be safe. And those of us with loved ones with with developmental and intellectual disabilities, we're such a concern because they can be so vulnerable. Becoming better educated and more comfortable addressing the topic of sexuality. It's a journey, and it's a lifelong journey at that. It's not just one conversation, right? For many, we come to this as a reactive response because of some life experience that we've had, but also we're proactive as parents and as as caregivers. And most certainly for everyone, we do it for safety, as I'd said. And it's also about dignity. Really, that's really in my evolution it's about dignity. It starts often in the school years, in middle school years, with all the questions. We have so many questions. There's usually some type of education within school, but not a lot. But we're often left with so many questions that are unanswered and so much information that we want to learn because we want to do it right. And it usually kind of starts in the puberty years when all of a sudden all these changes are happening. And, so that's why we're here today. And I hopefully tonight you'll leave with some tips and some ideas to practice and really become more comfortable about starting and continuing the conversation. And once again, most importantly, I think that remembering having these conversations, lifelong practice, not just one event. It's individual, very, very personal. We have good days, we have challenging days. Sometimes we have the answers, sometimes we don't. But really all that we can expect of ourselves is to do the best that we can. And remember, just as all things in life, it takes a village. So I'm just glad that we're all here together. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint here. Okay, and hold on just one moment. Whoop, let me see. Let's get this up. And hold on a second. There we go. Screen sharing.
While Beth is getting the PowerPoint queued up, I just want to tell everybody that today we'll be focusing on starting the conversation. However, if you have other questions around sex ed and sexuality, tomorrow at 10:30, you'll have the opportunity to ask one of our colleagues and who's also very well versed in sex ed and sexuality across the city, Consuelo Mercado from YAI, Consuelo Senior, excuse me, from YAI, and she will be here to talk on a number of questions, any questions that you may have. She will be happy to take them for you.
And I think we were, going to put up. We did have actually an initial poll, JC, just before I bring this up,
yes.
just to get an idea of the ages of, the loved ones that you're here for, and so it's always really nice to see that. Thank you.
So here it asks, what are the ages of your children? 0 to 3, 4 to 9, 10 to 14, 14 to 18, 19 to 22, and 23 and above. All right, please keep them coming in. This is really good information so we can know how to tailor this presentation some more.
It's always nice to see when we got young ones in here too, toddlers even. It's great. I love it.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have, seems like the largest group is between 14 to 18, and then the second largest is 10 to 14, tied with 4 to 9 years old. So yes, we also have about 5 between the ages of 19 and 23 and above. And yes, a couple that are from 0 to 2. Thank you everybody for participating.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay.
I'll share those results with you so you can see that.
Okay. Close that down. Okay. So I'm ready to share.
All right.
Let's get this going. Okay. Let me go. I got this poll. Sorry, I got that right in the middle. Here we go. Okay. Talking with your kids about sexuality. Well, now it's not. The goals today are to examine barriers that we all have to talking about sexuality, gain knowledge about sexuality, sexual abuse, and developmental disabilities, and to acquire and practice skills in communicating about sexuality. I always like to just start off of just to discuss a little bit about, what is sexuality. I think often we really focus on the first three letters, and we really go to the aspect of sexuality that is related to intimate relationships, and there's certainly there's so much more about it, but it's about connection and belonging. It's about relationships, all kinds of relationships. They come in all shapes and sizes. It's about how we feel about ourselves and others. It's about how we feel about being the gender that we are. It's about our sexual expression and our sexual behavior. And really, it's the total of who we are, what we believe, what we feel, and how we respond. So it's gigantic. It's who we are, and it's why it's such an important topic to talk about. What does sexual health mean? It means feeling good about and understanding our bodies, feeling good about who we are, having high self-esteem, feeling good about our gender identity and sexual orientation, having relationships that are positive and pleasurable, not exploitive. And it's about having information to make healthy decisions. It's also about avoiding STIs, unintended pregnancies, and the other challenges that come along in our lives. The reasons that it's really so important to have these conversations, with our children, particularly those who do have intellectual and developmental disabilities, because so often there is no sexuality in some schools, and what is offered usually is the minimal, and oftentimes those classes where they do offer more in-depth information, our children are not included in those classes. Talking about sexuality with our children helps combat unhealthy messages from our culture, from the social media that's bombarding us, right, day in and day out, and that we are so involved in, and is such an important part of our lives. It normalizes the topic. The more you talk about it, the easier it becomes, the easier it's for our children to ask questions, for us to bring up discussions with our children, and it shows our children that that we're open, that they can trust us, and that's, I think, what every parent wants. And it gives us the opportunity, I think, to really understand what is the information that they're processing and how they are processing it, and really get inside to get a little bit better to get a better understanding of that. Because it is so often difficult for them to articulate them. It gives us the opportunity to express our values to our kids, to our children. And it increases self-esteem to know about and to understand one's body. It increases our sexual health, and it also reduces sexual abuse. As we go through this, our webinar today, we, we'll have, people certainly asking all the questions. We want to talk about the experiences that we have, how we might be able to handle a certain experience. And once again, it's always important to respect all the differences of opinions. Things that we talk about in here are, confidential, don't need to use people's names. And all questions are good questions, and really just enjoy the conversation that we're going to have today. What we're going to do is we're not going to be doing a breakout room, but we, talking about the messages, I think that we received ourselves growing up is really, it has an impact on how our comfort level talking about sexuality and having these conversations with our children. And sometimes I think we might not even realize that, what are these messages and how they might impact. We can receive positive messages about our sexuality. We can also receive negative messages about that. And I think it's important to really to be able to reflect and understand that as we move forward. And certainly in the messages change that we receive through our lives, and then our own evolution changes along with that. So what we do have is a poll, correct, JC, to put up with some of that, some of the messages that people receive, and look through that poll and see what you relate to in there. So it's really interesting to see.
Yes, so please.
Coming into this, right?
Yes, so what messages about sexuality have you received growing up? Please feel free to check all that apply. Um, Sexuality is a natural and normal part of life, or not to talk about it, or don't have it. Sexual feelings are normal and healthy. Don't touch yourself. Don't have sex until you're married. Um, it's only okay to be heterosexual. Don't be a bad girl or boy or something else. Um, wow. I think for me, it was always, don't have sex until you're married.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. And never touch yourself. And we don't talk about that.
And we don't talk about that.
We don't talk about that in this household.
Yep.
Like, okay, well,
Yeah.
unfortunately, if you don't control the input or the information, you'll find it elsewhere. I know I did.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that that's why it's so important to have the conversation, to normalize it, because we want our children to receive accurate and safe information, and we want to know, we do our best to be the source of that. We can't, our kids won't live in a bubble, and they will have access certainly to things that we're not aware of, but by providing them positive messages, you can
Yeah.
really combat that. Yes.
Yes, so here we have, I'll just share the results with everybody so we can see. All right, so everybody, 60% don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Sexuality is in 40%, sexuality is natural. 50% say, don't be a bad girl or boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, all right.
Yeah. Others sometimes are, boys will be boys, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because we feel like it just stays in a vacuum.
Yes.
And it doesn't.
And oftentimes we really don't realize what those messages are that we received growing up. They're tucked away, but really I think that's why it's so important to really be able to reflect and see that, because it makes it difficult. It makes it difficult to have the conversation. Okay, I'm going to close that down. Okay. We have our next page here. Just some ideas, and we can put these, you can put these in the chat as you think about it, and JC will share them as we go through it. Or what are some of the reasons that it can be difficult to talk to sexuality with our children?
Actually on Facebook, I just want to share a comment. It was for somebody who couldn't take the poll. And good morning. For me, it was, once you try something, it can't be undone. You can't go back.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. Thank you for sharing.
So we have here, it can be difficult because we didn't have those conversations with our parents. Yes. It can be difficult to know what they are prepared to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. And also looking at the answers to that poll, I imagine it's difficult for people who were told not to talk about it to now talk about it with their kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think one of the things that I've identified is that, sometimes parents go through so much with this difficult subject in their own previous in their past, and then they just fear, with such a vulnerable population, sharing something, they might fear that oversharing gives that child knowledge of something and then makes them even more vulnerable.
Absolutely, and I think you hit that nail right on the head, and um, I think once again it's over and over, research has proven if you provide accurate information, right, that individuals are able to make better decisions and to and be and oftentimes those decisions are supported decisions, but they're able to make better decisions.
Mhm. We have another comment, and it says also what a parent wants to talk about may be discouraged by that parent's own peer network or even that child's school.
Hmm.
I think also insane to piggyback on that is that uh, sometimes we have extended family in our households, and the elderly parents don't want, they say, oh, you don't do that, we don't do it with you, and you're okay. And we let that influence what we share with our children too.
And there could be disagreement between the parents
Hmm.
what to share too, right? And that becomes difficult, makes communication harder,
Absolutely.
and what information to share and what not to. Yeah. um, Oftentimes I think we don't know when to start, right? We
Mhm.
don't know where to start, uh, exactly as you said, how much information to give and how to give it.
Right. And I think sometimes we just kind of need to understand from where a child is asking, if they are asking. And if not, yes, then guessing when is a good time to introduce the ideas and the concepts.
And listening, just it's so much is such a big part of communication is listening, right? And those pauses, just I think because as parents we do a lot of talking all the time.
Mm.
It's really important. Pauses are very, very important. And listen and remain calm. Particularly when if our children are to ask us questions kind of from out of left field, right? That throws us for a loop. And okay, I think that's really important as well.
And I think, speaking about children with IDD, sometimes we doubt their cognitive abilities to
Right.
understand and to wrap their heads and minds around this,
Mhm. Yeah,
Um, but I think it's important that we should always be sure that we understand that human development and growth doesn't stop at any point, and
no,
it's incumbent upon us to address our children, and give them that dignity that they deserve to know about this.
absolutely.
And I really appreciate all the parents that are here today that are trying to understand how to do that better
Right.
and want to do this the right way. In the
Absolutely.
questions and comments that we received upon your registration, so many of you indicated that you just want to get it right. And so that's so important. And that we have to honor that, and honor where we are in the process, and just realize that, getting this information like you're here today is going to help you be more successful in presenting this information the day that you decide to, or that you might get asked that, that tap on the shoulder and say, hey, what is that?
Hmm.
Um, you know,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, oftentimes our children don't, if verbal communication is not their most articulate way to communicate to us, right? It's just really to understand, trying to figure out what they are trying to say, and just even though an individual is not verbally communicating something, it does not mean that the feelings aren't there, or the questions aren't there. And so
There's
it's a
a
process working through that as well. And it's
Yeah,
a challenging one. It's a challenging one.
it is. There's a comment from one of our Facebookers, and it says, "I had a health class in middle school, seventh grade, that included sexuality. When I shared with my mom what I had learned, she went to the kitchen, took a banana, a condom, and she went over this entire lecture and asked, did they also tell you all this? I was impressed as much as she knew, but also I was sad that the school only gave us that information. Now, as a seventh grader parent, I talk to my kid day by day and step by step. That's so great. And that's really important. You know, it's interesting to note that here in New York State, the law only requires that we teach about sexual education around the idea of health, physical health.
Mhm.
And that's the minimal requirement, which is very surprising and alarming for me, given the
Very
urban
lonely.
teams that we have here in the city and the diversity that we have here. Um, so, to find this information is kind of difficult, and doesn't really support parents. And we need to be there to give that extra boost of vetted information. Um, because, yeah, I know like the comment from our Facebooker, I had sex ed and it was just about scaring you to death about STDs and,
Right.
a condom and a banana and have a good day. It didn't talk about sexuality,
Right.
sexual orientation, gender identity. I mean, gender identity wasn't even a
It was.
thing to date myself a little bit, but,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
um,
Go back.
and
It
so,
was not.
right,
There was the blue book and the pink book, and on Tuesdays the girls went here, and on Thursdays the boys went there with their blue, and
mhm,
that was the end of that. It was,
yeah.
yeah. So it's I'm just so excited to see really everything that is happening now. And it's just really, really exciting. And just over the past, when I really started to delve into this, really, really seriously, probably about 5 or 6 years ago. It's just to see what has evolved even over the past 5 or 6 years is tremendous, and it's really exciting, and people are asking, and really the conversations are really great. Really, so much information and so much networking. So I'm really I'm so excited about that.
Mhm.
We go on to our next one here. Um, so what is our role as parents? It's to provide information, and it's to provide information that is using medically accurate terminology according to the chronological age of our child, in a way that can be understood for their developmental age. And so a lot of little wheels kind of going on there. But medically accurate terminology, meaning, for example, when you're talking about your body parts, we name them medically with the medically correct terms. It's a penis, it's a vagina, it's a vulva. It's If they know the names, um, then in the event that they ever have to explain anything, right, they are using the correct terminology, and it's very clear what we're talking about. And they're going to hear all the other words, but it's really important to have what are the medically correct terminology according to their chronological age, because all of our bodies are developing right along at the same rate physiologically. And so that's why it's really important, in a way that can be understood for their style of learning and communication. Listening, really, really important. I think as parents, we love to talk, we're talkers, and giving that space and listening and those pauses are priceless, really priceless. Modeling for our kids what our values, our behaviors, because they're watching it. We think they're not, right, but they are. They always are. How many times, even myself, I'll say, oh, just like I'm doing everything just like my mom, so they do. Our kids are watching us all the time, and I'm watching
Always.
my family members all the time. Finding support with your immediate family, finding support with your friends, finding support with any teams within your school that you can access, within the community. If your child, if you have support staff, bring that support staff in. Anyone that you can help is your village. Who is in your village? Who is in your circle of support? Work with them. And I think as parents, as we start to understand better this big topic, right, it's easier for us as well to discuss it with the support people around our children. Not for them to instill their values, but for them to be able to understand, these are the facts and these are the ways as well to answer questions.
Right. And
And
I think to also add to that, support, and I think, especially today, we need to kind of break free from the traditional mindset of what that support network used to look like.
yeah,
Because, we have so many resources here in New York,
absolutely,
whether it's from government, local, state, federal. We also
absolutely,
have many people that are peers, that are non-traditional peers, that are outside of our work, we know through our social circles. And so, we need to find the people that are supportive of us
absolutely.
and build in those networks and those support networks. I know, speaking from my perspective as a Hispanic and Spanish individual, like my family, that would have limited them because, like, oh, we don't talk about this outside of our home. We don't talk about this outside of this generation. And like we wouldn't talk about that at church, or we wouldn't talk about that, in this way or that way because of cultural or upbringings and even religious implications. So, we just kind of have to think of, like, all right, I need to get this information from the best possible source. And if that person will support me, then that's an ally that I didn't have
Absolutely.
before. And it doesn't necessarily need to look like it used to. It doesn't have to be my parents or my grandparents or my teacher. So I think that's really important here, especially as we try and develop support and creating our own village.
Yeah, and as you had said, they're just the amount of resources out there is just so it's wonderful to see, and it's really it's growing and growing. So that's really really exciting, and sometimes it comes from places you least expect. So
Mhm.
always be open, right? In our search, it's once again, one thing leads to another, and in our search for really what we're looking for, and to be positive supports, absolutely. And respond in a positive way about sexuality. And if we don't have the answers to things, we can always come back. We can come back. We'll find the answer and let's come back.
Right. And to just remember that, you know, our children, they internalize so much and emotion is so intense.
Absolutely.
So being left alone in your own thoughts, we as adults can understand how damaging and how dangerous that can be.
Mhm.
And to just imagine what that might be like for a child, regardless of disability, uh,
Absolutely.
and maybe even more. So we need to be careful with how we phrase things and remember that within specific intention, how language matters and how we express ourselves when we're trying to describe these subjects.
Absolutely. Language really matters. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Okay. Um, we're going to go through, we have several slides here about human sexual development. It's always a good thing just to revisit it and to go look over it and really get just the foundations of what it is. Um, Human sexual development is the development of our biological sex we're developing as a fetus. When we are born, we come out, the doctor looks at our genitals, right, and say, we got a girl or we have a boy. And so therefore, your sex is assigned, and your gender is assigned at birth as well. Um, um, but through that process, as we develop as individuals, there's also the development of our gender identity, and what is our role, what is our gender role within our society, within our culture. Um, Boys don't wear pink, right? Uh, Boys don't play with dolls. Girls, don't have trucks or whatever. But it's very, and that's certainly changed a lot, but those things are still deeply ingrained, right? And we realizing it or not realizing it, there are those roles within our society that we have. And we have the development of our values and our attitudes towards sexuality. There's all of the physical and the emotional changes through puberty. Regardless of disability or not, we go through that as well. Development of sexual orientation, and we have affectional attraction, we have romantic attraction, and of course erotic attraction. There's the development of our sexual behavior, and that's, it develops as an individual see what's being modeled around them as well, right? Some families are very, very affectionate and hugging, and other families are much more, stoic, hands off, very quiet, right? So many factors that influence that, our culture, it's who we are, and the development of our sexual identity as well. And as we go through life, we have the development of our sexual knowledge. I think those, our children where there is not a developmental disability, they're accessing that knowledge from social media, from the internet, from what I always kind of say, like, the treehouse talks with your friends in the backyard. That's just kind of what you do. You're exploring, figuring things out. There are those children that are receiving information, right, from their parents, because there is that comfort level in discussing things and having those open conversations, and for others there's not. And development of our sexual skills, and as we explore who we are and what our feelings are, our deep feelings are. And oftentimes, once again, our children with IDD, they don't have so many of those experiences, right? Getting together with peers, talking about things, asking questions within your peers, as is often done, and they don't have those experiences, and oftentimes don't have those experiences, are very limited. And communication, how do I communicate if I don't have if they're not developing the language as well, or communicating the way that you and I might communicate verbally. So there's once again a lot of things going there. Just to kind of go a little bit through the lifespan, interests, concerns, and behaviors of young children. Their body parts, we're teaching them their body parts. They're discovering who they are. They discover who they are when they're sitting in the bathtub playing, and they're getting washed, and they're exploring themselves in the bath, out of the bath, all over. I remember once we were at the beach many years ago with a friend of ours who had I think a 3-year-old, and she was sitting there playing, in the sand and building a sand castle, and she got sand in her bathing suit, and she pulls her bathing suit to kind of get the sand out of there, and she goes, oh, Mommy, she goes, I'm broken down here. What is this? And she was very startled, but they will explore, and as and that's just what they do. And the function of our body parts and naming our body parts. We all have, we have our songs, right? And it's head, shoulders, knees, and toes, and what we have in the middle is not talked about. And when we do give them words, they're all the silly words that we do because that's what we do, and we laugh and we giggle. But once again, genital touching, exploring their body, who they are. Sex play in toddlers, playing doctor, right? Once again, understanding what their role is within society. I remember once when my kids were very young, someone was giving away one of those kitchen play sets. And I have three boys, and I said, oh, that would be really fun. Let's bring that over. They would love that. And a neighbor said, are you going to give that to your boys to play with a kitchen play set? And it's pink. And yeah, so I said, absolutely. Absolutely. And it was, at the time it was their favorite toy. And the other kids, the other boys from across the street and the other kids were all coming over to play with it too. So it's, once again, our culture and how we think about it. Reproduction, even at a little age, kids are curious as to, where they come from. And, the information that they want is just probably real basic, right? But at their level, but they're curious. They wonder if they see someone who's pregnant, where does that baby come from? What's inside there? So from a very young age, all of this is really important. Our roles as male and female, body image, absolutely. They, you walk into a preschool classroom, and you can see, right, you got a whole bunch of your little preschoolers together, and they care about how they look and how they're dressed, their image. That's from a very young age. And their need for privacy increases even at a young age. At 4, children are starting to develop a sense of modesty as well, a very, very basic sense of it. And of course, as you move up through the years, and you're in elementary school, it's certainly much more pronounced, right? But even at a very young age, and our children that do have developmental disabilities, that's one thing that parents will often say. He'll walk out of, my child will walk out of the bathroom, stark naked. They'll go answer the front door with a towel barely wrapped around them and kind of half fallen off, and saying hello to their neighbors and not closing the door. And those subtleties, right, are not developing as typically you would see in another child. And so it really has to be specifically and with intention taught to them, even from a young age. Let's not potty train. When I was working in early intervention as a special educator, and we're potty training, to bring out the potty and to put it in the living room, and to let them on the toilet in the living room, or while they're to use their trainer. And like, well, let's start from right now. We go to the bathroom in the bathroom, and it's private, right? And where you change your clothes, even from a young age, let's change in the bedroom, and give them that sense of public versus private, which is really, really a critical issue as we, as we go along, and a concept for them to understand. So we work those things in even from a very young age. Our interests, concerns, and behaviors of adolescence, the physical changes of puberty, hygiene, pimples, body odor, shaving, and that's a huge one, right? For regardless of shaving wherever you're shaving, legs, your face, your underarms, that's a huge sensory experience, and it's a huge sensory overload experience as well. And yeah, that's a big one. Friendships, and there's so many types of friendships as well, and really maneuvering through that and understanding that. Reproduction, pregnancy, birth, pregnancy options, those are things that adolescents are hearing about, learning about, have questions about. Sexual expression, huge, very huge. Contraception, sexually transmitted infections, sexual feelings. And oftentimes, our children need things, are very concrete thinkers. And, sexual feelings to, when we have that communication, with our children, it's put it in concrete terms, you know, what does it feel like when, you're enamored with someone, or you're, what are those feelings? Explain them in concrete terms, are really important. Um, and masturbation, and that's usually one of the biggest topics that comes up, the parents are concerned about. And once again, it goes back to public and private hygiene as well, of course. Mm. um, Interest, concerns, and behaviors of adolescents continues, right? Sexual orientation, gender identity. um, and I know a lot of parents have, concern about, will ask, when does, when does that develop, your gender identity? And I think that's, it's a process, right? It's a process, and it's fluid, and it can change through our lifespan.
I think
Our
that's
body image.
important. That's super important, Beth, that this is something that is evolving and it's developing since birth.
Mhm.
Because it's just allowing somebody to be who they are.
Absolutely.
And, then just because they feel one day today doesn't mean they'll feel that way a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years
Absolutely.
from now. And we can just look at ourselves as a prime example. We haven't, our feelings evolve on subjects.
Absolutely. And, in conversations that I've had with parents, um, but one mother said, when I was, my experience was, my child was, their exploration of this, there was a lot of anger feelings, and, confusion, and self-injurious behaviors.
Mm,
Yeah, and some really serious things, as they were just trying to kind of figure out who they were. And and this was this woman's child, transitioned, and the mom said, I'm just following the lead of my child. I'm just following the lead of my child. And once the transition was made, the just everything just completely changed. Just such a positive person, and just so happy with where they are, and much more, and not sitting in a corner, she would say.
mm,
um, and so that was one person's experience. And I have other parents who have said, my son says, I want to become a girl because I want to wear pink, and have earrings, and wear nail polish. And that's really, so understanding that, but also that, and that's good. But does that, you can have earrings, and you can wear nail polish, and regardless of your gender, right? You can. So I think allowing them to, continuing listening, but once again, that a color is not gender specific, right? Where you wearing a dress, how many cultures dresses, where you wear skirts, it depends upon your culture. And we're even seeing how fashion in our culture here is evolving, right?
mhm.
So really just listening, and
Right.
letting your child lead you as
Yes.
well.
One of our parents on Facebook is saying, I always tell my kids every physical body is different and special. And I say, your body is your temple. We are each responsible for taking good care of our bodies, and listening to our bodies is important. It tells us a lot when we listen. I'm in that transition where my kids are asking about puberty, shaving, waxing, when is the time, and how to ask for help, and when not sure about a decision. And I agree. It's a lovely connection when parents are there to support.
Absolutely. I remember when my son wanted to get, he wanted to have his ears pierced, and, okay, have you worked it into your budget? Sure, you can have it done. And he had his ears pierced, and, he went down, got his ears pierced, and had his ears pierced for about 6 or 7 months, and then took took the earrings out. I'm kind of tired of these. Okay. Just make sure you put them back in time if you don't want them to close up, because then you're going to have them pierced again. So, that's if you want to keep them open. But that's his decision. And a lot, friends would say, you're going to let your son pierce his ears. That's not my decision.
I feel that's very progressive, Beth.
That's his decision. He wants tattoos too. And I'm like,
I know when I said to my parents I wanted to pierce my ears, they were like, "You're crazy. Boys don't do that."
Yeah, we got that too. Yeah. So I just said, do you, just go find out how much it is and see if you got it in your budget. You're 27, right? When my other son went to pierce his nose, actually, he did it at age 18, and he came home and, expecting to get me really riled up, that he pierced it. He's like, I got my nose pierced. I'm 18. I can do what I want. And I said, absolutely. I said, I just wish you had told me so we could have gone down and done it together. Which he's like, you're not supposed to say that, Mom. But it's your body, right? It's your body. So, once again, all of those things culturally are clothes and do not, right? That doesn't determine your gender. So where were body image? Establishing and maintaining intimate relationships, ways of expressing affection, which, so many different ways of doing it. And I think oftentimes we don't, affection can be so subtle in so many ways. And we each have our own perception of what affection is. And even if it's just very subtle, it in that subtlety can be very pleasing to the people who are involved in it and happy with it, right? It can be. How to communicate with their partner, deciding about having sex, giving and receiving pleasure, and breaking up those heartbreaks that we have. And heartbreaks, they don't see, disability or not. Heartbreaks are for everybody across the board, regardless. Heartbreaks happen. And that's part of our life experiences and learning and how to move forward. And just back another, I always like to share a little story because I think that it really helps. Ways of expressing affection. I was chatting with a mom and her son, who's on the spectrum, has very verbal, very affectionate type of a guy, and has a girlfriend who, as well on the spectrum, is nonverbal, does not like people really touching her very much, perhaps close family members, but otherwise she's pretty much a hands-off type of a gal. And so they date, right? And when they are together, it's very interesting to watch. There's not a lot of interaction between them. Is even eye contact is very, very limited. And often if an outsider looking in would see two people who are just sitting and not aware of the other person next to them. Hold hands every once in a while, will text, using both words and a lot of good old emojis, right? And so, the mom said, called this other mom and said, I just really want to understand what this relationship is, because my son is, does he, how does your daughter feel? Does she feel that my son is her boyfriend, or should it really be their best friends, or where, kind of where are we at? And so the mom, the young girl, the woman says, no, if you ask my daughter, she'll say, who is your boyfriend? And she'll say your son's name. And she said, the interesting thing is that my daughter doesn't like people hugging her or holding her hands very much, but your son is the only one that she will allow to do that outside of our, special people. And when you think about it, I mean, that speaks volumes. That speaks volumes. And so just because their ways of affection is very subtle, right, to what my experiences might be, right, but they're both very happy within that relationship, very, very happy. So you never know. And not to project our perceptions on someone else. They're in, what, they're happy. And if the day were to come that they were to break up, well, then we have to, we work through that, right? You work through that. So it's just really interesting. And that story has just always been so profound for me. It really has. Here we go again. Interests, concerns, and behaviors of adults, pregnancy and birth, parenting, contraception, sexually transmitted infections, masturbation, sexual orientation, and gender identity. Once again, that goes through your lifespan. And parenting, if you were to, my son, he's I think the biggest things in his life are movies and relationships. From his first sentence, one of his first sentences when he was very, very young, of all things, was, "I want to get married in that church, mommy." Probably about age 8. And he wants to have a family. He wants to family is important. "I want to be married and I want to have children." And that's, you hear those wonderful stories over and over again, right? So he's got those very, very deep feelings, just like we all do. He does, as well as so many of us, right? Interests, concerns, and behaviors of adults, establishing and maintaining intimate relationships, separation and divorce, body image, menopause, and I'll throw in there too, andropause, right? For males, they go through those changes. It's real. Changes in sexual functioning, and those are our children. Once again, will be going through these as well. As well as separation and divorce. I've known, I've had the opportunity to know many individuals with IDD who are married and have separated and have divorced. And it's tough for them. As it is with anyone else. And, you also hope that they also have received the support and the education how to maintain a relationship, right? Not just kind of like, whoof, they're divorced, we don't have to worry about that anymore, So you really hope that support and that education, is present. But that happens to all of us. Can happen to all of us.
I think in you bringing the attention to this is just a reminder for us that these are the things that we need to be teaching our kids from early ages.
From a very early age.
And reminding ourselves that, like it has a purpose in the long term, and that this will be modeled later. Because one thing that I've heard in a group of teenagers is that I wish I had been taught how to be in a relationship, how to understand what a relationship is, what's a friendship is versus something more intimate. What is intimacy? How far is intimacy how far can that go before I need consent?
Correct.
Introducing ideas of consent,
Yep.
and also introducing how to cope with rejection,
Yep.
and understanding how to know that life will go on. um,
Absolutely.
and yeah, and especially because we have to remember also that our kids don't have necessarily the language to express it.
Mhm.
And sometimes that might even include the physical ability to express it for those
Correct.
that don't speak.
Yep.
And so we really have to figure out how we can convey these ideas and these important concepts that are going to always be there throughout the rest of their lives, because not only will it help them in terms of sexual education and making better decisions around sexuality or making those decisions that are their own to make, but also how to become better self-advocates in the long term, in all
Absolutely.
aspects of life.
Yep. Yep. And I think that, the issue of consent is huge, of course. And, going back to, the modesty part, right? In public and private, um, it's important to start it and teach it with intent from a young age. And it's building a foundation, right? It's always building a foundation. And so to build that foundation for consent as we know it is, as it relates to sexuality, right, is building that in by um, talking about consent is permission, right? It's permission, and talking about and giving and to give permission and to understand that you're not able to have, and not and if permission is not given to you, is started at a very early age. um, do I have permission to take that hat off your head? No, you don't. Okay. Not, as opposed to, oh, come on, let me do it, come on, it's okay, let me do it, it's okay. But really, our children have to understand that they can say no and it is respected. And as you build that in from a young age, when we come to now, we're talking about consent as far as our, and can I take a hat off your head, is that's your body too, right? Can I comb your hair? No. you know you can't touch me. Can I wash your face? No, you can't. And they might not wash it the way we want or whatever, but and it's always a balance. It's always a balance. But our children have to understand from a young age that they can say no, that we do ask permission, particularly as it relates to their bodies, right, and for their autonomy. And they can say no and they can say yes, and they have to accept no or yes from someone else as well. And it's building it in from very, would you like to hug your Aunt Susan? No. Okay. You
And
don't
that's
have to
okay.
hug anybody you don't want to. And if grandma comes up, come on, and yeah, well, will you blow her a kiss? But it's but not to force someone to hug someone else, because once again, often it relates to abuse. Oftentimes it happens, right, from very close family members.
Right.
So teaching them just permission. And you can say, I was watching some videos out of a teacher actually from Australia. It was very interesting. And even at a young age, he would say, do I have consent to take that hat off your head? No, you don't have my consent. Okay. Or someone, or and the child would come up and take something off the teacher's desk, and the teacher would say, no, you don't have, that's mine, leave it right there, you don't have permission. And even just building that in, it's really critical from a young age. And we know from experience that the learning curve is longer as well, right? So, and processing it, so that's really that's really important. Yeah. So that's one of those things, just like public and private, we work it in from a very young age. Also, so many of our children develop what's called learned compliance, in the sense that they're in often very strong behavioral programs, right? And they are taught to do as they are told.
Mm.
And yes, they are, my child, he's great. He's so, he's so well behaved. He does everything that he's told. And on one aspect, that's very good. On another one, it's not. Correct. They have to be able to say, no, I'm not going to do that. And there's, but they have to be able to you work that. They have to have opportunities where they can say no, and it's respected. It's really important because they have a lot of, they'll do what a person in authority tells them to do. And once again, to give them that, to develop that skill leads right into self-advocacy and sexual self-advocacy. So
Right.
it's so very interrelated, and boundaries. I mean, when I look at this whole topic in my head, I go through the big topics. The big topics to teach, which we're doing so much, is public and private, boundaries, right? Consent, permission, and that all leads up into self-advocacy.
No, absolutely. And one of our parents on Facebook was just saying, as a society, we need to keep practicing the idea of personal space. And during my pregnancies, I noticed many people don't know how to keep their hands to themselves.
Yeah.
That is very, very true. And I can't, I never thought about it growing up until like I had friends getting pregnant themselves. And like, I wish people would ask me if they could touch my belly.
Yeah. Yeah.
They just think, oh, and they just do it automatically. I'm like,
Yeah, they do it.
wow. And
Yeah.
now I see that and I'm just kind of like, where did
Yeah,
you
it's
go?
absolutely. I just had that conversation similar to that just the other day with a very good friend of mine who has this most amazing hair. It's just like these curls that you just want to dig your fingers into and touch it because it looks so beautiful. And she said, somebody came up to me the other day that that an acquaintance kind of, and said, oh, I love your hair, and just started putting her fingers all through my hair. And I was like, no, you don't do
Mhm,
that. And she said, it just left me with this horrible feeling, and
mhm.
how often do we do that with our little children as well? Like, and you're tickling them and you show affection, and we all do that, but I'm much more mindful. You really start to become very, very mindful of it, right?
Oh, no,
and
absolutely.
and to give respect even to a young child, they just, the only way they're going to, you learn respect by giving respect, right?
A friend of mine, he's 36 years old, quite a professional here in the city, and he's Black, and he dyed his hair blonde, platinum blonde. It's beautiful. And somebody just went up to him, a complete stranger, and grabbed his hair. Like, I just want to touch it. And it's like,
No, no,
come
no,
on.
no.
I want to pause here for 1 second and say we said we were going to take a break at the hour. I just want to ask everybody: do you want to take a break, or are we good to keep going on? How do you feel? Those of you that are with us on Facebook and on Zoom, please share with us. Should we take a break, or are we good? One of our parents on Facebook said, "That's funny. I have curly hair, and I definitely know the feeling." Yeah, it's just rude.
It is. Mine's not real curly, but people, they're like, that's so nice. Your hair's so nice. Yeah, yeah. It's absolutely hair is a big thing, and there, I will say oftentimes, and that's such can be such a sensory experience as well for right for me. It is obviously, and that's often as a question is, how do I address, my child is always wanting to touch everybody's hair, right? And how do I that, they're always looking for that. How do we, how do you work that in? And that personal space. I know at one time, we with one uh with one young person, what we were doing is for that sense of, we would say bubble. Our word was bubble. And we said, everybody has a bubble, right? And sometimes, you got to stay in your own, you stay in your own bubble. And in a way, it was a little, it's just kind of a nice word, right? That was the cue. You say bubble, and he, he would know to kind of step back, or give somebody a little space. And it was a little cue of that personal space, bubble. bubble. Everybody's got their bubble. And, and he started to, learn it. And sometimes you can even find a sign or a gesture, right? That would mean the equivalent of a, let's say, bubble, right?
Right.
That you don't even, you're not verbally sending that out, but whatever, you go like this or whatever it is, right? You kind of go,
So our attendees are saying we can keep going. Okay.
okay.
Push through it. I do want to say that we're going to have some more interactive questions, so please feel free to share in the chat window or the Q&A any questions or comments that you may have to participate more in the discussion. Uh,
Yeah,
we
and
really
as
love-
we kind of now go into the experiences part, it's, once again, questions about experiences is, I think, what a lot of people are looking for, and we all learn from them. So just as far as a discussion here, how are the experiences of developing for a person with a developmental disability the same as someone without a disability? And how are the experiences of developing for a person with a developmental disability different than someone without a disability? And this is where you kind of get into, I think, a lot of the meat of what a lot of parents are wondering about. What is the same? The assigned gender is the same, disability or not. Gender roles are reinforced, right, across the board. Um, our bodies are going through the same biological changes. And that's, if you were to speak with, with parents, would usually say, it's like, why can't that be the one thing that's delayed? Why can't we slow that down? Of all these other things, it seems that it just comes too fast. But by the biological changes and everything that comes with it, right? Everyone needs the same information based on your biological age, but presented according to, in a way that they're able to understand at their developmental age. Everybody has sexual feelings and sexual needs. And everybody has dreams like everyone else might, to have relationships, to have babies, to have a family, not to have a family, not to have kids, just to have a best friend, whatever it is, they've got dreams. Everyone has dreams. Everybody has dreams. What's different? For our children, once again, lack of basic sexuality information and skills, right? They're not receiving the education in school. You really have to dig and look for it. It's hard to talk about. As parents, they're often viewed as either being asexual because we don't see, right, that or they're not expressing in the way we communicate, for whatever, those sexual feelings, those sexual needs. They're often looked at as being oversexed, right? Because they're always touchy. Those individuals who are very touchy and feely, who are exploring, who are looking, who are masturbating in public as opposed to in private, right? They're taken out of classes. They're not given the information and the skills. So there's just so much going on. Parents will say, well, I really haven't talked about it because my child's never asked me.
Right. Or
So
I've had a parent say to
phew,
me,
phew, they've never asked me. We don't have to talk about it.
yeah,
Yeah.
I've had a parent say to me, my child doesn't have the cognitive abilities, therefore I don't need to address it.
No.
And I think you're highlighting something that's very important, is the stigmatization and shaming that happens in our society, between parents and parents, people that are non-parents on parents, and people that are parents with a child with a disability not knowing what the disability is. And we're very, there's this stigma around this. And, we think, people with IDD, they don't have sexual feelings, or we just kind of like dismiss or eliminate, and that's something that we need to stop doing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, so it's, yep, it's huge, and that's and I think that there's often a real a real fear, not only of our children, of being sexually abused, but being accused of
Mhm.
being the abuser.
Right.
um, and that's really scary, and it happens. It does happen. It's a very and they're, they're unaware, right, of what their body language is, or what they're, once again, going up to, what if they, to a 22-year-old or a 30-year-old, or some, going up to a younger, a 14-year-old, right, and touching their hair or whatever. It's that people would look at like, and it's very, it's scary. It really is. um and are they able to then communicate and defend themselves, right, saying, I didn't mean anything, I just wanted to touch your hair? Well, that's, touching hair is, once again, bubbles, right, space. And they can't communicate that. It's very, it's very scary. um Once again, our children are often considered children, eternal children, right? And there are behaviors that are accepted, um, because they are considered eternal children. They are, they got it. They have a disability. It's okay. It's okay to go and hug everybody. It's not okay to go and hug everybody. They're not expected to act your age. And you can set a bar that these are things that are, this, at this age, this is what is accepted, and how to, and what the boundaries are, right? And those are taught, and they're taught with, you have to teach them with intention, and very, very concretely. um, I remember there was, a number of years ago, there was watching something about it was a young man who had young man with Down syndrome. His dream was to have a restaurant, and to be the greeter at the restaurant. He wanted to be a greeter at a restaurant, what he wanted to do was hug everybody. He wanted to hug everyone. And he wasn't, they didn't find any place that would allow him to hug everybody as they came in. So he had his parents set up his own hamburger place for him. And that's what he did. He greeted everybody and he hugged everybody coming through the door, which, he's a nice, warm person, and that's great. And he's affectionate. But you think, on the other hand, should you be hugging every single person, whether you know them or you don't know them? What's that message you're giving as well? So I often thought about that, and I'm like, should you be hugging everybody? That's just a thought. um Nature of disability. Once again, our children, particularly those on the spectrum as well, but not limited to them. This social communication, those nuances, they're not picking things up. They don't pick up on social cues. Or they, even their own body language, they could have body language that, to them, they're not realizing what messages they're sending as well, right? That they could have a facial expression that looks like aggression, and they're not realizing that it is aggression, right? I've seen that happen, and then someone else will be like, whoa, this is a dangerous person. No, they're not really understanding. So really, once again, picking up on social cues, understanding emotions of others, and that is something that is constantly worked on, so many different ways, through visuals, understanding, what is the emotion of this person, what are they feeling. It's a lifelong process. They need additional topics taught to them. As you were saying before, we need to teach dating skills with intention, right? They just don't pick them up. How to start a conversation, how to end a conversation, even how to continue a conversation. right? And how to and a conversation is not just talking about what your strong interests are, but in listening to what someone else is interested in, asking questions, right? As far as conversation goes, that's a really tough one. Asking questions is hard, is really hard.
I feel like everybody could use some of these.
Yeah, well, so there you go, right? And and once again, I often laugh. I was talking with a very dear friend of mine, and so oftentimes we see with the people that we support, they have they have behavioral clinicians, and we've got our behavior consultants, and trying to ensure that if we can get let's get a behavior consultant on this plan in this circle because this individual needs it, and then you have to write up these big justifications of why you need a behavioral consultant, right? And my friend looks at me and she goes, I wish I had one. So we should all have one. But and what is it? It's there. That's it's therapy, right? Why are we all going to therapy? Why do we sit down with our our we're drinking wine and we're having dinner and we're chatting for hours on ends with our friends? That's our therapy. That's our, right? We're doing it, and everybody does it across our life, our whole life. And
One of
our
our parents on one of
Hmm?
our parents on Facebook is just saying, this is definitely a difficult topic, and I'm trying to inform myself as much as possible to be sort of ready during this transition. So thank you for sharing that. Yes.
Yeah. So
We,
it's we all need support in this. We all need support. But it's often much more intention, right? And much more um absolutely. Understanding, teaching with intent. Yeah, dating. I lost my train of thought right there. But yeah, dating is the big one. Understanding, what are common interests, you know, with another person. That's part of having a conversation. Identifying emotions of somebody else is we all know how much our children often struggle with that. Our children often have lack of friendships. They have people who are friends and come and do things, but those friendships are often lacking, and loneliness, very
Mhm.
much. I think just this past year, we all really got a dose of what it feels like to be lonely, right, through COVID. The lack of social opportunities. They miss the informal learning, just picking those things up through your day-to-day experiences, and learning from them, and making those mistakes, and learning from our mistakes, which is really important as well. That the dignity of risk, which oftentimes our children don't have, because we don't want them to make mistakes. But once again, relationships are the good times and the bad times, and all of those things that we go through. They often lack the privacy to explore their sexuality. Really huge, right? Very, very huge. Um, Many parents, right? Do we let go of dreams of our children related to sexuality? Once again, we think of them as not as being not as sexual beings. We worry about the rate of abuse, about them. I'll go right back again about them being accused of abusing as well, unintentionally. And how we teach the topics is different. We've got, you really have to. I always remember it, saying, I one way back in the day when one of our, professors said, it was like, it's everyone is a learner, right? And everybody is a learner. And it's not that they can't learn. They just don't learn. They just don't learn in the same way, perhaps. And we just got to figure it out.
Mhm.
We really have to figure out who they are. Just because if they're not learning the way that we're teaching them, then let's see how else do we work through this. And that's really important. Everybody is a learner, and everybody's a lifelong learner. Everybody's a lifelong learner. Our children have a wide range of abilities and limitations. It's things that, and as does everyone, right? So many skills in so many areas, and in other areas they really need a lot of work and a lot of support.
Right. one of our parents on Facebook was just saying, my kids know I have group chats with families, but I also have group chats with closer friends where I could say and talk about anything. And yeah, and it's hard because, like Beth was just saying, these teenagers or children, they don't have these spaces and these opportunities to network like we do, and like socializing, especially when it comes to autism, is one of the key challenges. So engaging in social engagements, I guess, is not something that's readily available and provided. And it's like, okay, um, how to talk about these issues amongst peers, like-minded peers that are going through similar experiences and explorations, is a hard thing to do. And it's something that we acknowledge here at the Parent Center and through the Autism Initiative. It's one of the things that we do by providing the integrated transition program, which provides a safe space for these individuals that are transitioning into adulthood, that want to talk about these topics, including sexuality. But to have that support is so important, and we need to really figure out how to offer and provide those spaces, because it's not just a child might not necessarily feel like the parent is the best source, even though we think we are. And
Absolutely, absolutely,
and so
absolutely.
if we can offer them more opportunities to create their own village, especially as they
Yeah,
get into adulthood, that's even a better thing.
absolutely, absolutely,
One of our
absolutely.
parents on Facebook said, "Guilty. I am so focused on his medical needs and supports that this topic is not even thought of." Yeah.
Yep, yep.
Mhm.
I was chatting with a friend, and it's exact same thing. She said, "I'm so busy with all of the other things that it just never it I really didn't think a lot about it. I
Mhm.
really didn't. Yeah, yeah, absolutely." Absolutely. So many shared feelings, right? So many shared experiences. Absolutely. Um, Tips to talking about it. Once again, you may have to initiate the conversation. um, be calm. um, it's once again, it's always better to be as proactive as you can as opposed to reactive, but those reactive situations they certainly always come up. And I think also as parents, kind of in our world, we're always thinking 3 and 4 steps ahead too. So, that's a skill that often that we develop, but as much as we can. But then the unexpected always happens, right? It's okay to feel embarrassed, to not to know the answer or answer later. Um, you don't have to answer private questions either. Right? For example, when was the first time you had sex? So mom, right? Or mom or whatever. When was the first time you had sex? Um, that's a good answer. Oh, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked it. But that's private, and I'd rather not share that. Is there anything else you'd like to ask me?
Yeah, or maybe just ask why.
Yeah, or why,
Where's that question
and
coming from?
right, and or ask why, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, often I think too, and it's good. Why is such a key thing. It's such a key question.
Mhm.
Why, figuring out the why behind things, really figuring out the why and understanding. And yeah, I think often, and it's not unusual that parents will say, you can do this, you can get married when you're 35, you can do this when you're, and then they start counting the calendar. So when was the first time you had sex, mom? Right? Or
Mhm.
so you never, but the why is so critical. Why is so critical.
Yeah, I
Right?
think so many times we're so overwhelmed by the question posited to us that we just like feel like, oh, how much do I share? Do I overshare?
Yeah,
And then if we were just to take the minute to pause and ask, help me understand where you're coming from with that, or like,
absolutely.
because
Yeah.
maybe they're not asking us, what in our head, like worst case scenario. Oh
You're
my
right.
God.
You're assuming. Very good point. We assume, don't we? We
Yes.
assume.
We assume like, oh, are they about to ask me the mechanics? Or,
Yeah.
it's like, actually, no, they probably wanted to know what
Well,
something
yeah.
completely innocuous and harmless, so
Absolutely. Yep. Very good point. And it kind of, it goes back to when your child asks you, so, mom, where did I come from? And you go into this long litany of the whole thing. And then, yeah, all I want to know, my friend is from Rochester. Where am I from? You're right. So it's, you
yeah.
never, so, what are you thinking about? Very good point. Yeah, absolutely. And, you can, and if you decide if you decide to, you can come back, you can always come back with it. You can always come back to something, right? And get and give an answer. So yep. Use a private tone in a private place. When you are talking, um, having conversations, um, show them once again to reinforce what you're talking about, private topics, private things. Keep it in a private place with a private tone, so they once again kind of reinforcing public and private. Are we going to be talking about masturbation in McDonald's, or right? No, that's, and if the conversation to talk about that, that's a good question. Let's talk about that. Let's go. That's a private topic. Let's find a private place where we can sit down and talk about it. And once again, it's the nuances, right? Of public and private. As possible to give a consistent message, and a consistent message, not to say that answers might not change about something, or discussion opinions change, but try to certainly keep as consistent as possible in the messages that you're giving, and positive messages. Model, use visuals, role play, social stories. Examples from TV and movies are really once again, ways to reinforce, to teach things, with role play, and like social stories too, and visuals, always depict what the behavior is that you want them to be practicing, to be engaged, not as opposed to not, let's don't practice, let's not do this, but let's practice, this is what we do, right? To get that in your head, and to have them, it's like muscle memory, right? We're doing the what we want to do over and over again. Movies and TV, which are so right, and social media and all of that, magazines, well, so such a big part of our life, and those are opportunities to sit down and to find out, what are the shows that your kids are watching, and sit down, not to pass judgment necessarily, but to sit down and get into their world, right? And and you're sharing time with them, but it creates an opportunity to have discussions afterwards, kind of understand, what are they thinking about, what are they seeing, because you see a lot of stuff on TV that's, there's difference between entertainment and what's real life, and what's entertainment and makes us laugh on TV. If you were to do that, generalize that into your workplace, or into your daily life, could be extremely inappropriate, and could create misunderstandings, or whatever. And so it's really important, just even just to be that silence, whatever, and see and observe, and to find time where you can, even if it's just a momentary conversation. I've seen, you can watch things on the Disney Channel where, someone will walk up to somebody else and, slap them on the rear end, right? And everybody's laughing. That's entertainment on the TV. Do that in your workplace, or do that it's a whole different issue. And those subtleties are hard to understand. So those just give opportunities, getting into their world, and even with silent, just seeing what they're watching and what's the information they're getting. And once again, how they're processing it, right? How they're processing it. model, social stories. Oh, that was the same as before. Um, be as concrete as possible. And that's what we went back to before, is when you're, to, I really have special feelings about this, this person, and to explain, what is, romance, right? Those butterflies that you get in your stomach, right? All those special feelings, but being really concrete about that when, to explain it. Do you have romantic feelings? Do you have romantic feeling? Do you have feelings for somebody? What does that mean? How are you feeling? Butterflies, you're always thinking about them. You want to talk to them. That's a really special person. That's so that concrete is really important. Be patient. Practice. We think of the questions. It's always good to think, what are the questions that, I've talking with my friends that their kids have thrown at them, right? Or what are the questions that could be thrown at me? And sometimes you kind of think of the worst, what would be your worst case scenario, right? Or the tougher question to ask, and practice it. Practice, how am I going to answer this? And do your best. And it helps, and it makes you feel more comfortable, right? And feel, practice is always a helpful. Have a backup person. Really kind of goes, it's doesn't all come from the parents, right? It comes from, have other people around there that are supportive and positive, and it comes in many ways, right? There's so many resources out there. There's so much networking going on. There's so many people getting together that are supporting, and look for those things. It's not all on us.
And
Mhm.
to add to what you were saying though about, practicing, this is one moment where you need to remember that you know your child best,
Yeah.
you know your family best, and you know how to communicate with them best.
Yeah.
So, have somebody be that role person to, so that you can practice with and say, this is how my son is. I need you to do this so that I can try and explain it. And that way you're challenged in a way that'll be helpful for you. One of our parents on Facebook right now, talking about teachable moments, is that during one of the religious sacraments for one of my kids, the teacher spoke about abortion. And my child was new to this topic, and she came home asking if I had ever done an abortion. I told her to give me time to start cooking dinner, and after we could talk about the topic. I didn't want her to feel the topic didn't matter
Correct.
and the questions were not important. I needed time to think about how I was going to explain and share my beliefs too. It went
Absolutely.
well afterwards, but taking time to process is helpful, even for us parents. I think that's so important, and
Yeah.
having that pause, and building that pause, we like, I love that. I need to cook dinner, so I'll get back to you.
I'll get back to you.
but
Absolutely.
but it also, I love that you said I'll get back to you, because it does acknowledge the child's request for information, and it does respect them as well. So
Absolutely. That you're
it-
not just disregarding them. It's
Mhm.
it's it's really it is very important. And I appreciate sharing that. Yeah. Because you sometimes you just got to process it and think, how am I going to react to that? And you're remaining calm, as on you can remain calm. I'm going to go cook dinner, and probably inside, right? How we've all experienced, inside you're going, oh, all over the place, but
Right. Take it out on the onions.
get out on the onions. and you come back. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Teachable moments. And that, I know a lot of parents will do what they'll say. I know we know our kids best, right? Parents. And we have people out there that are supporting our loved ones. And give me feedback, give me, so we can understand, and let me help you understand. And if nothing is, we become good observers, right? And nothing is too small, because everything is, so the nuances in life can be just so subtle. And let's support this person to be just really the best that they can. And this is how this we can, let me help you we'll work together to find the answers for things. We'll work together to find the answers for things. Teachable moments, once again, reassure your person. It's good to ask questions. And you gotta take a break to go do some cooking and come back. I love it. Find out what that person is thinking and what he's really asking. Exactly, you had said, what are you really asking, right? Decide what message that you want to give, and just answer the question simply. Just keep it simple. Keep it simple, and you can build on that. You can build on that. And use medical terminology in the sense that when we're talking about what our bodies are going through, and our body parts, right, our genitalia, use the real names, and the medical terminology for things, for menstruation, for whatever our bodies are going through, masturbation, right, ejaculation. Use the words, use the real words, and encourage the person to give back. That was really a great question. Do you have any more questions? What did you understand that what are you understanding that I gave to you? So as they give that conversation comes back, it really helps understand the why too, right? And what they're capturing, and if it needs to be presented in a different way,
Right.
in an additional way,
To reinforce it, to reiterate
to
it.
build on it,
Yeah. And the parent who was just sharing with us about going to cook, she just said, I actually went to go listen to some Spotify while cooking and picked up some helpful tips to discuss with my child. And that's a very great way to use time. Maybe text somebody that you might find in your support network too. That could also be beneficial in that moment. But yeah, no, that's a great way to deflect and find a better resource or a better way to approach it. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And this was just kind of one of our questions here. If they come up with what's a boner, right? They're going to hear, our kids, everybody's going to hear, they're going to hear all of those conversations, all of those words. They come to you, what's a boner? And you kind of, oh, what's it, what is it? And well, once again, just kind of give the facts, right? Give the facts. Well, boner, it's a slang word, right, for an erection, and a slang word is just another word for a real word. And an erection is when the penis becomes hard. Some people think that there's a bone inside the penis, but in fact there is not. It's when blood flows into the penis and it becomes hard and erect. Mm. Do you have any other questions? But just keep it, very simple. And they hear a lot of slang. There's so much slang, and they're not right out there all the time. And you pick up the words, you use the slang, and so many times it's used appropriately, right? It's used, not, I don't want to say used appropriately, but it's how to, they use it, and they it's like you put the punchline in there at the right time or whatever, but you're not really understanding what you're saying, what the punchline is. And so there's so much slang going on around, obviously. And so it's really important when you hear that, when slang is used, once again say, that word that's a slang for this. And do you understand the words? Because I don't understand, we don't understand all the slang that's out there, right? And you want to make sure if you're using words in the right time, and it's not to hide it from them, it's to teach them what it means. And when you use time and place,
Mhm.
time and place, time and place. When mom said, I don't want my kids cursing, right? We don't, at home, we can curse all we want. Okay, but they know that outside the house you don't curse, right? It's time and place. So everything is, it's time and place. Yeah. And I'm just looking here. I was, we've got, wow, how time goes by. I've done a lot of talking. I don't know if there are other questions in there that, just one thing I wanted to add is that, when you are answering questions, oftentimes important points to think of are kind of the physical aspect of something, right? For example, a boner. This is the physical aspect of it. The social aspect of it, thinking of public and private, especially with masturbation, right? What is masturbation? This is what it is. That's something that's private. And the emotional side could be of something as well. It feels good. It often feels good. People do it. It's done in private. So kind of think of those, facts, thinking of, and usually public and private often that's the concept that is constantly reinforced and so important. Yeah. And I was just looking here at, once again, wow, it's so crazy how much we're already almost at 12:30. But if there are just, I open it up if there are other questions in there for people to ask.
Yes, any questions, please. We're here to take them. We definitely want to help support you start the conversation or have a better conversation. So yes, please. I know what I've seen in previous conversations is understanding how to have a conversation with a child that's not verbal, that doesn't speak.
Correct.
And, and also, what was it? Let's see, I think this has been a great conversation. Thank you.
Just
Thank
trying
you
to
for
see what
coming.
my next, yeah, this is kind of going up here, the physical, social, and emotional, kind of
Mm,
three aspects of answering question. Yeah, that's when their communication is not verbal, right? And a lot of it will go once to finding visual ways that can be, if they are a visual learner, right? Um, Finding visual, either pictures, whatever is visual, how they are reading you, to reinforce things. And then if someone is, right, if they're not a visual learner, it's really it's searching out how they learn.
yes, the parent
Um,
was sharing. It helps me reflect as a parent and as an advocate. That's so great.
yeah, yeah. Um, I was just going through here. I know there was what I'm just gonna go quickly through here. Well, once again, here's a condom. So mom, what's a condom? And if you kind of go the physical, social, and emotional, it's a rubber sock that covers a penis. Using a condom is private. It protects you and your partner. The emotional side is many people feel good when they use them because they're being responsible and they're protecting themselves and their partner. So those are kind of, we're giving facts, we're not giving opinions, which is really important for, we're not giving values here at all, right? And especially, for those families where they'll say, my support staff, or they don't know how to answer questions, and you can answer questions in, or in a factual manner. Without, it's important that the values come from the family. It's really important. I just wanted to go quickly to that was I want to say answering babies. Responding to behaviors, decide first if if there are a specific behavior is being observed. Decide if it's better to ignore the situation, if ignoring is inappropriate, because there are some things you might see a behavior and we can kind of put that on pause and we can discuss it afterwards. Certainly there are other behaviors that need to be addressed immediately, right? If someone is masturbating in public, we need to address that immediately. And once again, when you're discussing that, decide what messages you want to give the messages by responding simply and encouraging the person to give you feedback if they understood. And I did have here, I'm gonna go right through this. I don't have it here. Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay. We'll
Uh,
continue to share this. We do have a question.
yeah.
Uh, is there anything you would suggest to parents to continue the support in their schools? At times, I feel we still have a big gap between what happens at home and what happens at schools.
Right. What I'm going to do right now, I'm going to stop sharing this. I thought I had in this presentation. I'm going to stop sharing this. I'm going to pull up one. It's actually going to be in your handouts. But I'm going to pull it up. It's kind of topics to teach. And so it's a wonderful, it's a very helpful tool to look through, right? And to go, so it's a guide to what needs to be taught. So when you go to your schools, these are topics that we need to teach, to work on. Let me see if I can do this right, okay? Let
We
me,
also have another question,
yeah.
Beth.
Mhm.
How do you introduce an OBGYN visit?
Oh, wonderful. I'm so glad you brought that up. Um, let's see, I'm so glad you brought that up. Let me close this down. It's, you know what, it's important to start at an early age. um when would you typically start? We ask your OBGYN, when should a female start to see a gynecologist? um you don't have to be sexually active to see a gynecologist, and if you can have an internal exam, right, a pap smear or whatever, or an internal exam, even if you are not sexually active, right? And I think that was a conversation before in another one about that. And it's never a comfortable experience going to a gynecologist, right? You can do an internal exam, not using a speculum. If you do, you can use a pediatric one, which is much smaller.
Hmm.
Mhm. But if you have a really good, if you have a good gynecologist, one you trust, it's having that conversation of also weaning into it, right? Because our bodies, regardless, disease or anything that needs to be treated happens regardless of disability or not, right? And it's really important for a female as well, and if a male is going to a urologist, it's just so important to really make sure everything is okay. Your skin is so sensitive, right? Make sure everything is good, and to have that conversation with your daughter, and with your son as well, if they are getting examined, right? This is what they are going to be checking for. This is a person we trust in this situation. It is okay, and just building upon that trust. And it might take repeated visits, right, to a gynecologist, to in that sense, to build up on that. I remember there was one woman, right, I said in on one of one of the last webinars, that shared for her young daughter to become used to sanitary pads. She started even before she started her menstruation. She just put the very thinnest, finest sanitary pad in attached to her daughter's underwear, just so she would start to feel comfortable with having that in there. So when the time came that you need to use it, she was much more comfortable. And so being very proactive. But I have had experience with families that that their first visit to a gynecologist for an internal exam is at age 40, and that's late. That's late, you know. And there can be so much, you can have, in that sense, you can have discomfort. You could have someone could have, for example, vaginal itching, right? And we're not aware of it because maybe they're not itching when when we are observing them or when we are with them. And, that's something that needs to be addressed, right? It needs to be addressed. And so that's why it's, those checkups are really important.
I want to put up on the
Um,
screen what Beth was looking for, the
oh,
top
you got it. Thank you. Yes.
before we go.
Yeah. So here, this is kind of like I always say the hit list, right, of topics to teach. And and this is in the handout packet that everyone will be receiving. But as here it's been broken into four groupings. So I've got my social skills, friendship skills, relationship skills, and then your physical health and emerging sexuality. And in there we we get down to really the nitty gritty of all of things. But as you see, for sexuality education, 75% of it is about social skills and relationship skills,
Mm.
right? And you have your asking on a date, dealing with rejection, giving and receiving compliments. But this is really, if you look up at the top, phone etiquette, right? How often do you call someone if they're not answering you? How often do you text someone? Right, and then stop, is it, and you might have to be very concrete. You text 2 times. If they don't respond, then you stop.
Stop. Please.
And we've all had experience with that, right? Hello, 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 hello. So those are all really important things. But and then so 75% are all of these really, the social skills, and then 25%, just as important, is, when we get down to being male and female, gender identity, all sexual abuse, sexual feelings, masturbation, all of that. So we're already, as parents, engaged really in conversation about sexuality without reason, without realizing it perhaps, and building those foundations. But that handout is just really a helpful tool when you're going to know what this is what I need to ask for.
Our parent on Facebook was just saying that's an awesome tip, and it always starting early just to introduce the idea before it really happens. She said, I went and got all kinds of pads just to let my child know she has choices and
Yep.
it's not supposed to be an uncomfortable situation. That's so supportive.
Correct. Yep. Yep. So that's, yeah, excellent, excellent. I
Well,
appreciate it.
are there any other questions? We want to be respectful and mindful of everyone's time with us today. We want to thank you for being here and sticking it out until the end. It's a long conversation, but such a great one to have, and to have the support that we are getting from Beth. Beth, we thank you so much
Thank
for all of
you.
the
Thank you
tips
for
you've
having me.
given us. If you didn't have the packet because maybe you were a latecomer, don't worry. I will be sending that in the follow-up email, as well as a
Yeah.
presentation that Beth shared with you, the PowerPoints.
I'm putting
Wondering-
in the chat. I'm putting one more, just kind of a closing survey in the chat right now. Right.
Yes, Beth has a survey we would love for you to complete. Synergia the survey will show up whenever you click off this screen. I'll also offer that as an option if you would rather take a poll. But yes, we really thank you so much. And I will also be sending the link for Beth's evaluation in the follow-up email. There's a question, just wondering how often do you offer this workshop? So Synergia has been focusing on sexual health for all for the month of June and May and June. And we try to have this at least twice a year. This the Elevatus training has been something that's been in the development, and it's been gaining traction, especially here in New York State. And I would say we hope to have it again. And hopefully we can offer this more times throughout the year. I'm not sure. Beth, how often do you offer this?
We're right now this, I know we're going to be doing more in the fall.
Mhm.
And we're also going to, we're also working on training parents to become parent trainers, right? Which is exciting. At the Elevatus training a website, there's a lot of free resources on there. There's also a lot of webinars that are being given constantly on all different topics. And so that's a really really good thing to check out, elevatedtraining.com, right?
We'll be sure to share the
Yeah,
link.
you'll have that, but I would check them out there. So there's a lot of activity and a lot of really a lot of interactive webinars just like this, with a lot of networking and a lot of questions answered. And so there's a lot going on. Yeah.
Yes, and if you ever have questions, you can always email me directly if you need me to find a resource, or if you need, if you have questions on resources that have been vetted that we would support and can help ensure that help you. Goodness, tongue twister. Um, I'm happy to do that. Tomorrow, as I mentioned earlier, we'll have another continuation with Consuelo Senior from YAI, who will be here to answer any questions. And if you have more questions on starting the conversation, or more targeted questions around sexuality and sex ed, we'll be here for that. And I'll be sure to include the flyer and registration information in the follow-up email I send you shortly today. But yes, and thank you for this presentation. I loved it. My daughter is 28 years old. We're so glad that you were able to attend and that this was helpful. It'll be available on our Facebook and YouTube pages so that you can refer to it for later reference, future reference, and if you wish to share it out, please do. I'll go ahead and activate the final poll. Uh, but we want to thank you for being here. It's been a pleasure. Beth, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone who attended. Thank you so much. Tastes like strawberries on a summer evening. And it sounds like a song.
I'll stick around in case anybody has any additional questions help them with. But thank you so much for being here. And for our Facebook attendees, thank you so much. We'll see you later.